I'm Benjamin Smith. I'm the Executive Director of Southern Word. Thanks for having me. I have some slides. I've probably more language on the slides than is necessary, but a lot of it is just to document for this purposes kind of what the primary objectives and activities and outcomes in the grant are. I've been leading with this just because the work we do is we put writers in classrooms, and I think it's hard for people to understand the power of what happens when we go into classrooms. And so this is from a teacher. She's actually now chair of the Hillwood English department. And we're getting this over and over again from teachers. And these days, teachers won't let you in the classroom if you're not really showing outcomes. Something's really happening. There's too much stress. There's too much pressure. So keep that in mind as we go along. This was the title for our application, The Classroom, the Next Forum for Mental Health Conversations, because we feel there's a huge opportunity to expand on what we're doing already in terms of what we see young people talking about and the services that are available to them. There's more connections, and we can be providing better service to our young people. So we put writers in classrooms, we put music production and music mentors in classrooms and community settings also. Our focus has been spoken word poetry. And the reason, and I've spent 10 years, we started from the ground up here in Nashville and been building for the past 10 years. So I've spent 10 years trying to explain to people why spoken word poetry is essential. It's not just like an add-on, ephemeral thing. And so this is why it speaks so clearly to our deficiencies right now. And this is why people working with our young people and teachers working with our young people and understanding where they're at usually get this immediately before people who aren't in education or aren't in the classroom. So we have an engagement issue. Like a lot of kids, we're not even on the ballpark, on the playing field with them, because we haven't shown them a world or a system that they want to engage with or they see themselves growing up into and having opportunity. We've been talking a lot about the literacy component. It's obviously writing and then a strong public speaking component, which is very important. And over the past 10 years, that's really been our focus in terms of how we talk about it with schools. This is a great shift because it's kind of a shift in terms of our thinking, in terms of the importance of the mental health piece, in terms of our work as well. There's a huge diversity piece, which I'll talk about later, in terms of underrepresentation and professional, and the professional populations of people serving our youth, as well as a more diverse youth population that we need to speak to and address in some ways. And then finally, this is the piece we're talking about today, is the mental health piece. And again, we're excited to transition to this because we've been having so many mental health conversations with young people through this work that we need to formalize our relationship to the work we're doing with mental health. Before I go any further, the other thing I've learned is it's pretty impossible to talk to people about spoken word poetry unless they've heard it. And when they see a young person do a piece, then they get it. So I'm going to switch over right now and let you hear from Constance. Constance, we met in 7th grade at a program called the Bridge program. And she is now at Austin Peay State University. We lost touch with her for a few years and then reconnected with her when she was a junior in high school. She did some slams with us. She came to our writing workshop on Thursdays at the library. And then she went to Nashville State, and she's now in Austin Peay. And one of her things in terms of using her poetry and using her voice is really speaking and destigmatizing conversations around mental health. So what you're going to see is actually just a voice. You're not going to see very much, but I really wanted to share this piece. We did this piece at Vanderbilt at an event we called the State of the Word, and she started the event, and it was completely dark, and we just had her voice. So that's why it's completely dark. You're just going to hear her voice. But I think you'll clearly hear the mental health themes in her piece.
Let lightning strike. Let the storms keep you awake at night while your pen leaks the buckets of rain you've been fighting back. Let them know what it's like to bleed loyalty honesty, loyalty, passion, poison, joy, hustle through ambition, flowing, pooling, spilling into trembling hands, shed blood with their scars. Become relatives to their struggle, let them know you know the pain they never spoke of. Take note of the undocumented tears, keep speaking life. Because your metaphors cradle, your messages inspire, your punchlines throw hands on faces that never thought they deserved happiness. Make this mic your fire, let your flames consume your everything. Don't be afraid to drop bombs of rapid oxidation. Let hell rain on this stage. Let fury engulf this platform. If that's how you wrote it, then that's how you spit it. Don't be ashamed if you make them cry. If you cry. Not all tears are boiled in sorrow, just how not all smiles have roots in laughter. Be transparent. Be open. Pause. Inhale. Let us feel what you felt, what you're feeling, what you went through, where you're going, what you learned, what you're still learning. Pause. Exhale. Tell us what you'll never forget. Ride those emotions. Allow the waves to drown the hearts of the ones you unconsciously wrote them for, because if it's not written in passion, it is not a poem. So let your free flows flow. Take it to the stage and leave it there. Don't be nice, be nasty. Remember, cliches always sound dope when you say them. Speak freely, speak up, speak out, speak loud, speak spoken, spit spoken word as if that's the reason you wrote it. Your words are destined for ears. Your voice has a reason to be heard. Don't ever allow anyone to mute your ink. Don't you ever allow you to mute your ink, because there are no disclaimers when it comes to the heart. All is fair in love and poetry. Haters will always find ways to spit petty on your stanzas, but notebooks have multiple pages. Keep writing. When it feels the metaphors are rooting against you and your thoughts have given up, keep pushing. When the voices tell you you are no longer good enough and the nightmares have you afraid to cast out your devils, find purpose. When it's buried under the burdens of life and your wrists are too sore to carry it, then hand it to me. Because I know your lies, and I know the truths you try to hide. I know your tears I know your smiles and the tears you shed for them. I know the artwork on your arm, and I know you drew it. I know you're fighting a war made of medical words you hardly understand, and at times you wonder if you're worth more than the treatment. I've been there. In your shoes, my lips have tasted so many tears that if I were to put them in a bottle, it would not only be half full, but have a hole at the bottom. I know that negative mindset all too well. But when fire fills your furnace, when the hallucinations inflict irrational ideas before your eyes, when the ghost of your past gorge your progress, when hate happily hacks your heartbroken heart, hands you depression and tells you it's your fault, when these tyrant times thrash terror through your thoughts, you fight, you hustle, you grapple, you pause. Inhale. Let the whispers of the wind fill you with her hope. Hear her hymns, hold her hallelujahs, hug her harmonies helplessly. Pause. And exhale.
So, just a couple things to note about that. Obviously, you can hear the power of the piece and the subject matter she's talking about. One thing to note is the audience. A lot of those are young people her age or younger than her. Our board chair right now said when he went to this event, and he has worked in youth development for many, many years, said this and maybe the Special Olympics were the most supportive youth communities he's ever seen. And that's the reason I came to this work too, is because I saw it done and I'd worked with youth, and that was my impression too. It's like, this is an amazing way to work with young people. And when we go into classrooms, often what we tell them is that that they can be leaders in the way they talk about mental health issues. In a lot of ways, we have not been successful on their behalf in terms of creating a world where we can talk about those issues. Adults are often silent on these issues, so when young people get up and speak on them, it's tremendously powerful because it breaks the silence that we've created around these in the way we talk about these challenges. So think about that as you listen to and think about that piece. And think about the opportunity here and the fact that we're in so many classrooms. We also think about the limits of the existing system, and this is the way we're thinking about kind of what's challenging us right now is the individualized service model and how many people you're realistically able to reach through that model. Cultural disconnects around acceptable ways to discuss mental health, and this speaks to the diversity piece also. Very often those cultural disconnects, that communities of color are less well served by our mental health infrastructure than white youth and affluent youth. Information and communication limitations around mental health referrals, and the process and the way we do that, and that's come out recently, right, with MNPS and the questioning of teachers there and whether they're actually making referrals when they hear about these things happening, right? So that's also the comfort of the adults in handling these issues, and then the cost of treatment being a barrier also. So for our grant and for us generally in terms of the mental health piece, these are the goals and objectives. The next few slides, I'm not going to speak through every bullet point. You can see our bullet points, but basically it's a therapeutic process. Writing, speaking, sharing, especially in a group and a community, is a therapeutic process, and that's what we see in the classroom, and that's what's happening in the classroom. Last year we served about 3,200 students in 26 metro schools. In 2018 and 19, with this grant, our goal is to reach this many students. We've been in almost every high school over the past 3 years. We also work in colleges, we work at middle schools, and we work at elementary schools, although our work there is just starting over the past couple of years. So this is kind of the main unit of our service delivery, is a residency, which is 4 to 5 classroom hours. We're in a school 5 to 7 days. We see about 75 to 150 students. Some schools will do a unit for their whole grade level and then do a school-wide slam. And so there'll be young people speaking and writing and then speaking in front of their whole school on what they need to speak about. And so the writers go in and we do a curriculum that's even though it's spoken word, it's really heavily based around writing and creative writing strategies in the writing process for any sort of writing. It develops, we go through revision, we end with a finished piece, and then we do an open mic, or what's called a poetry slam, at the end of the residency. And it seems like a short time, but it's transformational for the young people, because not everyone's going to get to where Constance is, but a lot of young people get to the point where they speak for the first time ever in class. I'm saying this happens like every class. Like the teacher says, that kid hasn't spoken this semester. That kid hasn't gotten up and said anything, and that person just got up and talked about what's happening at her home. That's amazing. So it's transformative on a range, not for just people who become poets, and we tell people, we don't care if you become poets. We want you to be able to represent yourself, process your challenges in life, develop your identity. It scales also because the teacher sees how our mentors work with young people, and many of our mentors have been working in the classroom now longer than many teachers, and so they see their approach. And then they also get the lift from the peer-to-peer relationships and the peer-to-teacher relationships that kind of are shifted through this, and we'll come back to that. Another piece of our grant is our community performances, which are performances like Constance. We perform in front of about 12,000 people each year. We're at a lot of civic events, Child Advocacy Day, speaking on these issues. So this isn't funded through this grant, but because it's an important part of it, because it's another way this grant and this project scales in terms of having a model like Constance. And when you think of like how consumer media and commercial media scales to reach tons of people and sell their products, my feeling is we're outgunned in terms of how we, in our education systems and our mental health systems, in terms of how we use media to shape and shift culture. And so when you project people like Constance doing that, you have tremendous power to shape and shift culture. And having done this work for the past 10 years, I believe we shape and control culture. We often feel like it's out of our control and like we can't do anything, but I know I've seen substantive culture shifts through this work. These are our outcomes. Number 2 is really about more intentionally, we do this anyway, but more intentionally thinking about how we're connecting to counseling services at the school or outside of school, community resources, and how we're connecting young people. Because that's a complicated process too, in terms of how a young person is sharing something personal and where they feel then comfortable processing that further. It might not be with a school counselor. But refining that is a key part of this. Having 6,000 people in relation to the last comment speak about mental health issues through this is another goal. And since so much of our writing is personal in nature, we don't see that as a challenge. And then the connection to the peer community and teacher community. That connection is important. It's why we're losing a lot of kids. It's why we lose young people in college. It's why when you saw that video that went viral from the student in Lebanon, I think, right, about the suicide in Lebanon. Like, anyone who works in schools, that's not a surprise to them. You see that happening every day, but for people who are not, I think it's surprising. And what her video was about was basically the emotional disconnect. What our institutions look like, the white walls, the concrete block, the processing of thousands of kids in small spaces, moving from class to class, what that feels like emotionally. And what's happening is we're going into classes and basically saying, no, you're actually a person. I know the system makes you feel like you're a number and you're part of this herd, but you're actually a person, And that's tremendously powerful when you do that. I realize entering the mental health space, there's kind of professional questions about validation, right? So we've had an external Vanderbilt assessment about 3 years ago. The head of school counseling, who was Dr. Nicole Cobb at the time, had a Safe and Supportive Schools grant. So she made a big investment in this program to help us roll it out to schools. And part of that was an outside assessment by Dr. Carol Nixon, who's at Vanderbilt. And these were the findings, and the study is ongoing, and she's continuing to process the data that comes out of our work. But this speaks to the points and validates the points of what I'm talking about. The assessment had a few things. It had conversations with teachers, teacher focus groups, student focus groups, classroom observation, and then pre-post tests, which had academic measures and social emotional measures that the district uses. With the pre-post test, this thing about female participants and Hispanic participants improved statistically significant patterns related to feelings of belongingness. That's what we're talking about, right? Connection and attachment to community, as well as the academic knowledge, SEL. And then, let's put this down. Also note changes among biracial or other, which makes sense, right? It's people who are adrift a little bit, who are alienated, don't have a place, don't have a designated spot, and they need help defining who they are and where they fit in the system. And this isn't part of the grant, and we're not funding through the grant, but this is one of our oldest programs, working with Vanderbilt Adolescent Psychiatric Hospital. We've worked with the inpatient hospital for many, many years, and now we also work with the outpatient youth there. And so we worked with the psychiatrist team there to develop a pre-post test as well that tracked 5 different measures. And this was from our last round of surveys, kind of the positive movement on those measures. And this is one we use, this is kind of a standard. This 41% of surveyed students indicated they would write more frequently. We're trying to get young people to adopt a writerly identity. So again, to scale this, the inspiration carries them forward through the year and hopefully through their life. If we give someone the gift of writing to process their challenges, that's something they have for their entire life. If they adopt it, they know they can do it, they know it's there for them. So that's a measure, this is one of our main measures we look at. This comes back to kind of diversity and disparity issues that this speaks to. And this speaks specifically to Black men as just like zeroing in on one kind of unacceptable, unequal outcome in our society, you know, for hundreds of years. But it shows up in different places for different people who aren't finding space or are not finding access within our system. So if you look at the over-incarceration of Black men, and you look at our teaching populations, which are less than 2% Black men or African American men, and then doing this research, I found out that there was a similar trend in the mental health field as well, right? And then you look at Southern Word, and half of our mentors are Black men, and we're not even intentionally like a Black male mentoring program. But we do think about who's in front of our young people. We think about our young people and who they're missing in their lives and the role models that they're missing in their lives. So when you look at like our core teaching artists group, it pretty much is the flip of what we're seeing in, say, our teaching force, which is 75% white women. And I say that saying white women can be remarkable, awesome teachers, right? But in terms of the overall system and thinking about, you know, equalizing who's in front of our young people, we have this. And I think a lot of times when we think about our shifting our system, and I go to education conferences and I keep hearing them talk about literacy and engagement and diversity and mental health. And it's always hard for me to sit there and listen to it because we've been very successful with our work. But people have not scaled it to the place it can be and should be based on our need. Especially if our existing system is so unequal historically, year after year after year, and we're reinvesting and doubling down in traditional strategies and traditional institutions and not looking at different ways we can supplement those systems, that's an issue. You know, that's a challenge for me. Knowing that we have so many, you know, without doing much work, we have the opportunity to put so many great role models in front of our kids. Just in terms of your understanding of Southern Word, as I mentioned, we started from the ground up. We're not ordained to be in Nashville. It's 10 years of hustle is why we exist. We've grown to be one of the largest, if not the largest, organization of our kind in the Southeast. We're a private nonprofit, but we very much see ourselves as a consortium and a community resource. And we exist, why we're successful is because all these people have decided to come around and invest through Southern Word and not everyone do their own thing, which very often happens in other cities and other communities. It's like, we'll do our thing over here, we'll do our thing over here. It's very hard to get substantive traction with that model. So Metro Arts and Tennessee Arts Commission really are funding our administrative staff at this point. And along with some private foundations, and then which allows us to have other partners really pay the program costs for the work we're doing and to subsidize it. Because to pay those folks at professional rates with the discretionary budgets of folks here, you need it subsidized, you need matches, you need to have that to really be doing this professionally. So where this piece fits in, TBR has funded us in the past, not this year, hopefully next year, we're waiting to see there, but we still do work on college campuses. I mentioned what happened with this funding and this program is NPS, and Nicole Cobb funded it. That took us like a year and a half, 2 years, got us into every high school. At that point, when that ran out, we really did two things. We went to the schools and asked them to contribute, which they've done substantially. And then we had what was CEF, which is now this grant, for 2 years, continue that. So that's why this program exists in Metro Schools, is because of this grant for the past 2 years and the match from the schools. And so that's necessary for continuity too. Mention our library partner too also, because they've been such a key partner in all this in terms of that out of school time and out of space, and the Nashville Public Library Foundation. So that's my story, that's me. If you want to get in touch with me or us, thanks so much for having us. We're Southern Word. I'm Benjamin Smith. I hope you will support this work.